Long before the mighty Persian Empire carved its name into the chronicles of civilization, the Iranian plateau was already alive, a crossroads of wandering clans, forgotten kingdoms, and cultures whose roots reached deep into the prehistoric earth. The saga of Persia doesn't begin with empires or kings. It begins with movement, the slow, purposeful drift of peoples searching for land, survival, and destiny. Among them were the Indo-Iranians, ancestors of both the Persians and the Indo-Aryans of India. Their migration across the endless steppes north of the Black and Caspian Seas would set the foundation for one of the greatest civilizations humanity would ever see. In the early 2nd millennium BCE, waves of Indo-European tribes began leaving their homeland, not in sudden invasions, but in gradual tides driven by climate, curiosity, and the eternal pull of opportunity. These groups spoke early tongues of what would become the Indo-European language family, the mother of Sanskrit in India, Old Persian and Avestan in Iran, and many others that would shape entire worlds of thought. They brought with them a unique way of life, mastery over the horse, warrior-based societies bound by honor and hierarchy, and a deep spiritual belief in the cosmic struggle between order and chaos, light and darkness. The whispers of these ancient beliefs survive in the Avesta, the sacred text of early Iranian faith, among the oldest spiritual writings known to mankind. By the late 2nd millennium BCE, the Indo-Iranians had begun to settle across the harsh but sheltering lands of the Iranian plateau, a landscape of vast deserts and rugged mountains that tested endurance and rewarded resilience. Over time, these settlers divided into tribes: the Medes, Persians, Parthians, and Bactrians, kindred peoples with shared tongues and kindred gods, yet distinct in their customs and territories. The Medes established themselves in the northwest, in a land later called Media, while the Persians, a smaller and humbler tribe, settled farther south in a region they named Parsa, known to the Greeks as Persis and today as Fars. Their societies were tribal, their power local. Each group followed chieftains whose authority rested on kinship, loyalty, and strength. Their lives revolved around herding, farming, and warfare. Yet within these modest beginnings, something greater was taking shape, the first quiet sparks of empire. To the west, the ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia loomed, powerful city-states ruled by kings and gods, by laws written in stone and temples that touched the heavens. From the Assyrians, Babylonians, and Elamites, the Iranians learned the arts of administration, architecture, and diplomacy. To the east, trade routes stretched towards Central Asia, bringing goods, ideas, and new faiths. The early Iranians were not isolated wanderers. They were adapters, absorbers, transformers of everything around them. One of their closest neighbors, the Elamites, ruled from the city of Susa, a civilization thriving since the 3rd millennium BCE. Though the Elamites and Iranians were culturally distinct, centuries of contact blended their legacies. Elamite methods of writing and record-keeping would later shape Persian bureaucracy, so much so that even under the great Achaemenid kings, Elamite remained one of the empire's official languages. Meanwhile, in the rugged northwest, the Assyrians were expanding, fierce conquerors whose armies marched eastward into the Zagros Mountains. There they met the Medes, warriors hardened by their homeland's terrain, fighters who would not yield easily. By the 9th and 8th centuries BCE, the Medes were no longer just mountain tribes. They were uniting, gathering under local leaders, binding their scattered clans into something stronger. Greek historian Herodotus later wrote of a man named Deioces, a visionary who brought the Median tribes together and founded a kingdom with its capital at Ecbatana, modern-day Hamadan. Whether legend or truth, one thing is certain. The Medes were emerging as a true power, laying the earliest foundations of what would one day become the Persian Empire. The Persians, in contrast, remained in the background, mentioned in Assyrian records as Parswash, minor allies or subjects of the Medes. Yet in their quiet corner, they were learning, watching, adapting, and preparing. The world had not yet noticed them. But history soon would. And through it all, their faith and worldview remained the invisible thread that bound these tribes together. The eternal conflict between good and evil, light and shadow. From this spiritual soil would grow Zoroastrianism, the faith of Zarathustra, the prophet who would give Persia its moral heart and shape its destiny. By the dawn of the 7th century BCE, the Iranians had become masters of mounted warfare, swift, strategic, and relentless. These were the warriors whose descendants would follow Cyrus the Great and Darius the Great, conquering lands across 3 continents. But before that triumph, one empire had to fall, the mighty Assyria, whose collapse would open the gates for a new world to rise in its place. By the early 7th century BCE, the ancient Near East stood on the edge of transformation. At its heart, the Assyrian Empire towered over its rivals, a war machine built on conquest, fear, and unyielding discipline. For centuries, its armies had crushed resistance from Egypt to Elam, leaving cities in ruin and kingdoms in chains. Yet even the mightiest empires eventually crumble under their own weight. In the shadow of Assyria's dominance, a new force was gathering strength in the mountains to the east, the kingdom of Media. The Medes, descended from those early Indo-Iranian settlers, had spent generations uniting their clans and refining their strength. From rugged hill tribes, they evolved into an organized confederation capable of challenging even the Assyrian warlords. According to Herodotus, their first true king was Deioces, a man renowned for his fairness and wisdom. As the story goes, his reputation spread so widely that neighboring tribes turned to him for justice. Out of this trust, Deioces rose to power, uniting the Medes under a single rule. He built Ecbatana, a magnificent city of concentric walls and rising palaces, to serve as his capital. Whether the details are legend or history, they reveal a deeper truth. Under Deioces, the Medes began their transformation from fragmented tribes to a centralized kingdom. After Deioces came his son Phraates, a ruler far more ambitious than his father. Phraates extended Median power across the plateau and brought neighboring peoples, including the Persians, under his command. The Persians, though still a small vassal kingdom, learned from the rise of their Median overlords, studying the strategies and statecraft that would one day be their own. But even as the Medes strengthened, Assyria began to decay. Decades of relentless expansion had drained its armies and divided its rulers. Rebellions erupted in its conquered territories, in Babylon, Elam, and beyond. The empire that had once seemed invincible now staggered under the weight of its own brutality. Then came Cyaxares, son of Phraates, the true architect of Median power. Ascending the throne in the early 6th century BCE, Cyaxares reorganized the Median army with a discipline and structure that rivaled the Assyrians themselves. He divided his forces into units of infantry, cavalry, and archers, bringing unprecedented coordination to the battlefield. Under his command, the Medes became not just defenders of their mountains, but conquerors in their own right. In 612 BCE, Cyaxares forged a monumental alliance with Nabopolassar, the Babylonian king who had also risen against Assyrian rule. Together, the Medes and Babylonians marched against the heart of the empire, Nineveh, Assyria's legendary capital. The siege was long and brutal. Walls once thought unbreakable fell beneath relentless assault. When the dust settled, Nineveh burned, its palaces collapsed, its people scattered. The Assyrian Empire, which had ruled the Near East with iron for centuries, was gone. The fall of Assyria sent shockwaves across the ancient world. In its wake rose 2 dominant powers, Media in the north and Babylon in the south. For a brief moment, the Medes stood at the height of their glory, their domain stretching from the Halys River in Anatolia to the Zagros Mountains. A vast realm, powerful yet fragile, bound by alliances and shared ambitions rather than deep-rooted administration. Cyaxares had built the foundation of a true empire, but it rested on shifting ground, dependent on tribal loyalties and noble alliances. Even in victory, the Medes lacked the bureaucratic unity that would later define Persia. Their power was strong, but not stable. When Astyages, the son of Cyaxares, inherited the throne, the cracks began to show. He ruled over a rich and far-reaching kingdom, but one burdened by internal rivalries and waning alliances. The bond with Babylon weakened, and discontent brewed among the Medes themselves. And in the south, among their Persian vassals, a young and gifted leader was about to rise, one whose name would echo through eternity. That leader was Cyrus, of the Achaemenid line, grandson of Astyages through his mother, Mandane. According to legend, Astyages dreamed that his grandson would one day overthrow him, and, fearing prophecy, sought to destroy the child. But destiny, as history has often shown, cannot be undone by fear. Years later, that same boy would grow into Cyrus the Great, a man destined not only to challenge his grandfather, but to redefine kingship itself. By the mid-6th century BCE, the world was shifting once again. In the rugged southern lands of the Iranian plateau, within the small kingdom of Anshan, a new ruler emerged, a man whose vision would eclipse all who came before him. His name was Cyrus II of Persia, remembered through the ages as Cyrus the Great. Cyrus was born of both Persian and Median blood. His father, Cambyses I, ruled the modest Persian city of Anshan, while his mother, Mandane, was the daughter of Astyages, king of the Medes. This dual heritage gave him legitimacy in both nations, a bridge between two worlds destined to become one. When Cyrus inherited his father's throne, Persia was still a vassal state under Median dominance. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. The once mighty Median Empire had grown complacent. Its nobles were restless, its unity fractured, and Astyages' rule had turned rigid and distrusted. Around 550 BCE, that tension ignited into open rebellion. According to ancient chronicles, from the Nabonidus Chronicle to the writings of Herodotus, Cyrus rose in revolt against his grandfather. The war that followed was swift and decisive. As Median armies marched to crush the uprising, key nobles, including the powerful general Harpagus, defected to Cyrus's side. When the final battle came, the Median forces collapsed. Astyages was captured, and Ecbatana, the great capital of Media, fell into Persian hands. But Cyrus did not act like a conqueror. He did not destroy, enslave, or erase. Instead, he absorbed. The Medes were not annihilated, they were embraced. Their administration, their officials, even their traditions were woven into the fabric of a new empire. Cyrus made Ecbatana one of his royal capitals, honoring the very city that once ruled over him. It was the first glimpse of what would define his reign: wisdom over vengeance, inclusion over domination. In that moment, a new empire was born, the Persian Empire, the first true superpower in human history. With Media now united under his banner, Cyrus turned outward. His ambitions stretched far beyond the mountains of Iran. Through both diplomacy and force, he began to weave together one of the largest empires the world had ever seen, and he did it not just through conquest, but through respect. His first great challenge came from Lydia, the wealthy Anatolian kingdom ruled by King Croesus, famed for his gold and alliances with Babylon, Egypt, and even Sparta. Croesus underestimated this rising power from the east. In 547 BCE, Cyrus led his army westward to meet the Lydians at the Battle of Thymbra, near the Halys River. The Persians fought with speed, precision, and adaptability, overwhelming Croesus's forces and forcing him to retreat to his capital, Sardis. But Cyrus moved faster than anyone expected. He besieged Sardis through the winter, breaking Croesus's confidence that he would survive until spring. When the city fell, so did one of the richest kingdoms of the ancient world. Lydia's gold, its ports, and the Ionian Greek cities along the coast now belonged to Persia. It was a conquest not only of land, but of strategy. Cyrus was building an empire founded as much on intelligence as on might. Next, his armies turned east, across the deserts and mountains into Central Asia. One by one, regions like Bactria, Sogdiana, and Parthia fell under his rule. With every victory, trade expanded, roads connected distant peoples, and the Persian name spread across continents. But it was his campaign against Babylon that would define his legacy forever. By 539 BCE, Babylon, once the heart of civilization, had grown unstable. Its king, Nabonidus, had alienated the powerful priesthood of Marduk and lost the people's trust. When Cyrus approached the city, he presented himself not as a conqueror, but as a liberator chosen by Marduk himself. According to the Cyrus Cylinder, one of history's earliest declarations of human rights, he entered Babylon peacefully. There was no bloodshed, no pillaging. He restored temples, freed captives, and allowed displaced peoples, including the exiled Jews, to return to their homelands. This was rule through mercy, not fear. Under Cyrus, every nation within his realm was allowed to keep its language, its religion, and its traditions. All he asked for was loyalty and peace. It was a revolutionary idea, an empire of diversity united by respect, not submission. He established a system of regional governance, satrapies, each overseen by a satrap or governor, laying the foundation of one of the most efficient administrations in ancient history. By the time Cyrus fell in battle in 529 BCE, perhaps against nomads near the Caspian Sea, his empire stretched from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River, a realm so vast and organized that it would endure long after his death. At his resting place in Pasargadae, his tomb still stands, simple, solemn, eternal. An inscription said to be his reads, "O man, whoever you are and wherever you come from, I am Cyrus, who founded the Persian Empire. Do not begrudge me this little earth that covers my body." Cyrus's greatness lay not just in the lands he conquered, but in the idea he created, that empire could exist without oppression, and that power could coexist with justice. That vision would guide Persia for centuries to come. When Cyrus the Great passed away in 529 BCE, he left behind not only the largest empire the world had ever known, stretching from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River, but also an enduring ideal, that kingship could be wise, merciful, and just. His son, Cambyses II, inherited both the throne and the immense responsibility that came with it. But Cambyses was not content merely to preserve what his father had built. He wanted to expand it, to push Persia's boundaries beyond all imagination. His gaze turned toward the southwest, to one of the most ancient and fabled kingdoms on earth, Egypt. At the time, Egypt was ruled by Pharaoh Psamtik III, the young and inexperienced successor of Amasis II. During Amesis's reign, relations with Persia had been relatively peaceful, even cordial. But after his death, the alliance unraveled. The new pharaoh's attitude shifted, and with that, the stage was set for war. Cambyses prepared meticulously. Although Persia was not known for its navy, he forged powerful alliances with the Phoenicians and Cypriots, whose ships and seafaring expertise gave him control over the eastern Mediterranean. He also negotiated with Arab tribes across the Sinai Peninsula, ensuring safe passage and water supplies for his armies through the deadly desert. Every move was calculated, every alliance strategic. In 525 BCE, Cambyses launched his invasion. The decisive battle took place near Pelusium, on Egypt's eastern frontier. According to Herodotus, Cambyses employed a psychological tactic unlike any seen before. His soldiers carried images of cats and other sacred animals, creatures revered by the Egyptians, upon their shields. Fearing to harm these holy symbols, the Egyptian forces hesitated, and in that brief pause, Persia struck. The result was devastating. The Egyptian army was routed, and Psamtik III fled south, only to be captured soon after. Egypt, the land of the pharaohs, the cradle of civilization, had fallen. Yet Cambyses did not enter Egypt as a destroyer. He assumed the title of pharaoh, worshipped the local gods, and respected native customs. He visited temples, funded religious ceremonies, and allowed priests to continue their rituals. Through reverence rather than repression, he secured the loyalty of the Egyptian elite, at least for a time. However, not all accepted Persian rule. Later Egyptian accounts painted Cambyses as a blasphemer and a tyrant, a ruler who desecrated temples and mocked their gods. These stories, though likely exaggerated by later nationalist writers, reflected a deep resentment toward foreign domination. Still, Cambyses ruled wisely in many respects. He understood that Egypt was not just a conquest. It was a jewel in the imperial crown, rich in culture, resources, and history. By claiming its throne, he became the legitimate successor to one of the world's oldest dynasties. But ambition has no boundaries. After securing Egypt, Cambyses dreamed of pushing even further, into Nubia, Carthage, and the Siwa oasis, deep in the desert. Yet the vast sands and harsh climate proved merciless. Supply lines faltered, and one expedition vanished completely into a sandstorm, lost to history, a haunting symbol of overreach. Then came troubling news from home. A man claiming to be Bardia, Cambyses' own brother, had seized the Persian throne. But there was a terrible secret. Cambyses had allegedly ordered Bardia's death in secret before leaving for Egypt, fearing rebellion. So who was this man now ruling Persia? If he truly was Bardia, then Cambyses' crime had been exposed. If not, then a usurper had taken his place. Desperate to return and reclaim his empire, Cambyses began the long journey back through the desert. But fate intervened before he reached home. In 522 BCE, Cambyses too died under mysterious circumstances. Some say he accidentally wounded himself with his own sword. Others whisper of suicide or assassination. Whatever the truth, his death threw the empire into chaos. The man claiming to be Bardia, or perhaps Gaumata, a Magian priest impersonating him, ruled briefly. Confusion spread like wildfire. Satraps across the empire hesitated, unsure whom to obey. Rebellions broke out from Babylon to Media, and the stability Cyrus had built began to crumble. But amidst the turmoil, a new figure rose from the shadows, a soldier of noble blood, sharp mind, and unbreakable resolve. His name was Darius, son of Hystaspes, a man who would restore the empire, reshape its structure, and carry Persia to heights even Cyrus had not imagined. History would remember him as Darius the Great. The year was 522 BCE, and Persia was on the brink of collapse. King Cambyses II was dead, and across the empire, uncertainty reigned. A man claiming to be his brother Bardia had seized the throne, but whispers spread through the royal court and army alike. This wasn't the real prince. It was an impostor, a Magian priest named Gaumata, who had taken Bardia's name and face to rule through deceit. Amid the confusion, one man refused to stay silent. He was Darius, son of Hystaspes, a noble of the Achaemenid lineage and an officer of the elite immortals, the royal guard that protected the great king himself. Returning from Egypt, Darius quickly understood what was at stake. The empire built by Cyrus and expanded by Cambyses was fracturing, and someone had to act before it vanished entirely. According to Darius's own record, the monumental Behistun inscription, carved high into the cliffs of western Iran, he and 6 other Persian nobles conspired to overthrow the false king. In a daring assault, they stormed the usurper's fortress, killed him, and restored rightful rule to the throne. Darius declared his kingship not merely as a political act, but as a divine calling. In the Behistun carvings, he wrote that Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of light and truth, had chosen him to defeat the lie and restore order to the world. Whether seen as propaganda or faith, the message was clear. Darius was not a pretender. He was the protector of truth and the heir to Cyrus's legacy. But taking the crown was only the beginning. The empire was unraveling. From Babylon to Elam, Egypt to Media, revolts erupted everywhere. In a single year, Darius faced and crushed 19 uprisings, recording each victory in inscriptions that still stand. Every name, every province, every false king brought to justice. When the fires of rebellion were finally extinguished, Darius turned his focus to the future. He realized that the Persian Empire's survival could not rest on conquest alone. It needed structure, efficiency, and vision. He began with reform. Darius divided his vast realm into satrapies, provinces each governed by a satrap, or royal governor. These satraps collected taxes, oversaw justice, and maintained order, but they were never beyond the king's reach. To keep them in check, Darius established a network of inspectors, secret royal agents known to the Greeks as the king's eyes and ears. They could appear anywhere, at any time, reporting directly to the throne. It was one of history's earliest systems of centralized oversight. Next, Darius reformed the empire's economy. He standardized taxes, set fixed tribute amounts for each province, and introduced a unified currency, the gold daric and the silver siglos, stamped with the image of the king as an archer. For the first time, Merchants from India to Anatolia could trade using the same coin. Persia's economy flourished, binding a continent through commerce. But Darius's genius went beyond administration. He understood the importance of connection, of tying distant lands together not only through power, but through roads and communication. He built the legendary Royal Road, stretching over 1,500 miles from Sardis in Anatolia to Susa in Persia. Along its route, way stations, inns, and relay posts allowed couriers to cross the empire in mere days. As Herodotus marveled, nothing mortal travels faster than Persian couriers. This network turned the Persian Empire into something unprecedented, a living, breathing organism where messages, goods, and ideas could flow freely from one corner of the world to another. Yet Darius was not content with roads and riches alone. He sought to immortalize Persia in stone. On a grand terrace beneath the Zagros Mountains, he began construction of Persepolis, a ceremonial capital of awe-inspiring scale and artistry. With its vast halls, towering columns, and detailed reliefs depicting delegations from across the empire bearing gifts to the king, Persepolis was more than architecture. It was ideology, a symbol of unity through diversity, of empire as a family of nations under one crown. Religion, too, held a central place in Darius's rule. Though a follower of Zoroastrianism, he did not impose it on his subjects. He invoked Ahura Mazda in royal inscriptions and emphasized truth, justice, and divine order. Yet he allowed conquered peoples to keep their own gods and temples. From Babylonian ziggurats to Egyptian sanctuaries, faiths coexisted under his protection. It was this spirit of tolerance that kept the empire stable and loyal. In Egypt, Darius even completed a grand project begun centuries before, a canal linking the Nile to the Red Sea, uniting the Mediterranean with the Indian Ocean. On its stone walls, he inscribed words declaring himself King of Kings, who joined two seas. Darius also sponsored expeditions to chart unknown lands and rivers, pushing the boundaries of geography and trade. He believed that knowledge, as much as conquest, was a pillar of empire. But his reign was not without conflict. In the empire's far west, the Greek cities of Ionia began to rebel. Encouraged by Athens and Eretria, they rose against Persian rule in what became known as the Ionian Revolt. Darius crushed the rebellion, but the interference of Athens ignited his fury. According to legend, he ordered a servant to remind him every day, "Master, remember the Athenians." That vow would set the stage for one of history's most iconic rivalries, the Greco-Persian Wars. By the time Darius's reign neared its end, the Persian Empire had reached its zenith. It was the largest, most organized, and most prosperous realm on earth, stretching from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea. Its roads connected nations, its coin unified trade, and its administration inspired generations of empires to come. Under Darius the Great, Persia was not only powerful, it was civilization itself. By the closing years of Darius the Great's reign, the Persian Empire stood at its glorious peak. Its borders stretched from the Indus Valley in the east to the shores of the Aegean Sea in the west, a vast realm uniting countless peoples, languages, and gods under one banner. But on the empire's far western frontier, a spark was kindling, a spark that would ignite one of history's greatest rivalries. That spark began in Ionia, a coastal region of Asia Minor home to Greek city-states long under Persian control. For decades, Persia had allowed these cities to govern themselves, demanding only tribute and loyalty. But the system had one fatal flaw. The Persians ruled through local tyrants, Greek rulers loyal to the empire, not to their people. Over time, resentment grew. The Greek spirit of independence clashed with Persian authority, and by 500 BCE, the tension finally erupted. The city of Miletus led the rebellion, guided by its ambitious ruler Aristagoras, who, in a twist of fate, turned against the very empire that had once supported him. Seeking help, Aristagoras crossed the Aegean to plead with mainland Greece. His appeals to Sparta failed, but Athens and Eretria, bound by shared identity and wary of Persian dominance, agreed to join the cause. In 499 BCE, Athenian and Eretrian ships sailed across the sea to aid the revolt. Together with the Ionian rebels, they marched inland and attacked the Persian regional capital of Sardis, setting it ablaze. Though the citadel held, much of the city was destroyed. When news reached Darius, he was furious. According to Herodotus, the great king drew his bow, fired an arrow into the sky, and swore vengeance on Athens. Then he commanded a servant to whisper to him every day, "Master, remember the Athenians." Over the next few years, Darius's armies crushed the rebellion city by city. The final blow came in 494 BCE, at the Battle of Lade, a naval clash near Miletus. The Ionian fleet collapsed amid betrayal and disunity. Miletus was destroyed, its people enslaved or deported, and the revolt was extinguished. But Darius had not forgotten those who had dared to intervene. In 490 BCE, he launched a retaliatory expedition, not merely to punish Athens and Eretria, but to bring all of Greece under Persian dominion. A massive fleet set sail across the Aegean, capturing the island of Naxos and then Eretria, which was burned to the ground. Then came Marathon. On the broad plain northeast of Athens, the Persian army landed, confident in its superiority. The Athenians, joined by a small force from Plataea, faced an army many times their size. Yet they had something the Persians lacked: unity, discipline, and home ground. Their commander, Miltiades, a man who had once served under Persian command, knew his enemy's tactics well. When the Persians advanced, the Greeks charged straight at them, a shocking move that defied expectations. Their flanks encircled the invaders, and in a matter of hours, the mighty Persian force was broken. The Battle of Marathon was over almost as quickly as it began, but its impact was eternal. Thousands of Persians lay dead on the field. Athens had lost only a few hundred men. It was a miracle and a message. The Greeks had stood against the greatest empire on earth and prevailed. Marathon became not just a battle, but a symbol of courage, freedom, and the will to defy tyranny. For Darius, it was a humiliation he could not forget. He began preparing another, far greater invasion, one that would crush Greece completely. But before he could act, rebellion broke out in Egypt, diverting his attention. In 486 BCE, before the campaign could resume, Darius the Great died. His empire remained the strongest in the world, but his final mission, to avenge Marathon and conquer Greece, was left unfinished. The task now fell to his son and successor, Xerxes I, heir to the throne of the Achaemenids, and the burden of his father's unfulfilled vengeance. When Darius the Great died in 486 BCE, the Persian Empire stood as the most powerful realm the world had ever known, stretching from the valleys of India to the shores of the Mediterranean. But Darius left behind unfinished business, the conquest of Greece. That mission now fell to his son, Xerxes I, a ruler born into glory, raised on prophecy, and determined to complete what his father had begun. Xerxes was confident, intelligent, and relentless, every inch the image of a Persian king. Yet before he could look westward, he had to secure his throne. Egypt had rebelled once again, and unrest threatened the empire's unity. In his early years as king, Xerxes crushed the Egyptian uprising with ruthless precision, restoring Persian authority along the Nile. Only after peace was re-established did he turn his eyes toward the Greeks, the defiant cities that had dared to humiliate Persia at Marathon. For 4 years, Xerxes prepared for the greatest military expedition the ancient world had ever witnessed. From every corner of the empire, men, ships, and supplies poured in. Persians, Medes, Babylonians, Phoenicians, Egyptians, Indians, Scythians, all gathered under the banner of the great king. Greek historians claim the army numbered in the millions. Modern scholars believe it was smaller, yet still immense, hundreds of thousands strong. To carry such a force into Europe, Xerxes commanded feats of engineering that astonished even his enemies. At the Hellespont, where Asia meets Europe, Persian engineers built 2 colossal floating bridges of ships bound together with cables. When a storm destroyed the first attempt, Xerxes, in a moment of fury, ordered the sea itself to be whipped and branded, as if punishing it for defiance. The second bridge held, and in 480 BCE, his vast host began its march into Greece. The earth trembled beneath their feet. It seemed that no power could stop them. But the Greeks would not submit. Divided though they were by politics and rivalries, Athens, Sparta, and other city-states forged a fragile alliance, determined to defend their homeland against the greatest empire on earth. They knew they could not face Persia in open plains, so they chose the terrain carefully. Their first stand would be at Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, a narrow mountain pass where numbers meant little and courage meant everything. There, King Leonidas of Sparta, with just 300 Spartans and a few thousand allies, took position to block the advancing Persians. They knew it was suicide, but they also knew their sacrifice could buy time for Greece to unite. For 3 days, the Greeks held firm. Xerxes' soldiers, though countless, could not break the Spartan wall. Every assault was repelled. The Persians fell in waves, their numbers meaningless in the narrow pass. But betrayal changed everything. A local named Ephialtes revealed a hidden mountain path that allowed Persian troops to flank the defenders. Surrounded, Leonidas dismissed most of his allies and remained with his men, fighting to the last. The Spartans died to the last warrior, their valor echoing through history. Though Thermopylae was lost, their sacrifice became legend, a rallying cry for all of Greece. Xerxes pressed forward, his armies unstoppable. Athens was evacuated, its people fleeing to nearby islands. The Persians swept into the empty city, burned the Acropolis, and claimed victory. But that triumph would not last. At sea, the Greek commander Themistocles devised a bold plan. He lured the massive Persian fleet into the narrow straits of Salamis, where the size of Xerxes' navy became its weakness. The smaller, faster Greek ships darted between the Persians, ramming their hulls and shattering their lines. From a golden throne on the shore, Xerxes watched as his fleet, the pride of his empire, was torn apart before his eyes. What had begun as an unstoppable invasion turned into chaos on the waves. Humiliated, Xerxes withdrew the bulk of his forces back to Asia, leaving a smaller army behind to finish the conquest. But the following year, in 479 BCE, that army was defeated at the Battle of Plataea by a united Greek coalition. The Persian invasion was over. The great king's dream of conquering Greece had died, but his empire remained vast and powerful. The defeat did not destroy Persia. It only reminded the world that even the greatest empires had limits. Xerxes returned to Persepolis, his throne secure, but his pride shaken. In the years that followed, he turned his attention to monumental architecture, completing grand palaces, vast gates, and reliefs that celebrated Persia's majesty. Yet behind the splendor, unrest simmered in the court. In 465 BCE, Xerxes I was assassinated in a palace conspiracy, a tragic end to a ruler who had once commanded the greatest army on earth. After the death of Xerxes I in 465 BCE, the Persian Empire stood at a crossroads. Outwardly, it still appeared magnificent. Its borders stretched from the Mediterranean to India, its cities glittered with gold, and its name alone commanded awe. But beneath that grandeur, fractures were beginning to spread. Xerxes had been assassinated in his own palace, the victim of a plot led by his trusted official Artabanus. His son, Artaxerxes I, ascended the throne amid betrayal and bloodshed. Though young and untested, Artaxerxes managed to stabilize the empire, but the unity once forged by Cyrus and Darius was fading. Across the empire, rebellions flared, in Egypt, in Bactria, and among the powerful satraps who ruled far from the royal court. Each uprising was crushed, but at a heavy cost. Persia remained immense, yet its strength was no longer unshakable. Meanwhile, beyond its western borders, the world was changing. The Greek city-states, once divided and vulnerable, had grown strong and ambitious after their victories against Persia. Athens, leading the Delian League, rose to dominance, pushing Persian influence out of the Aegean. Though the empire continued to manipulate Greek politics through diplomacy and gold, it would never again command the Aegean world as it once had. Under Artaxerxes I and his successors, Xerxes II, Sogdianus, and Darius II, the empire endured, but its spirit waned. The royal court at Persepolis became more a place of luxury and intrigue than of leadership. Satraps ruled their provinces like kings, often keeping tribute for themselves. Corruption spread, and loyalty became a commodity bought with silver rather than earned through faith. Still, the Persian flame did not die out completely. Under Artaxerxes II, the empire regained some stability. He ruled for nearly 50 years, the longest reign of any Achaemenid king. Through diplomacy and wealth, he managed to influence Greek affairs once more, funding rival city-states to keep them divided. It was a clever tactic, gold instead of war, but it could not heal Persia's internal decay. By the time Artaxerxes III took the throne in the 4th century BCE, rebellion had become almost routine. Egypt broke free again, forcing the great king to personally lead a campaign to reclaim it. Though he succeeded, each victory came at a greater cost than the last. The empire was exhausted, its vast machine creaking under centuries of rule. Then came Darius III, the final king of the Achaemenid dynasty. He inherited an empire still vast, but hollow at its core. The satraps had grown independent, the army was filled with mercenaries, and the once unshakable royal authority had weakened to a shadow of its former self. And far to the west, a new power was rising, one that would challenge the ancient world itself. In Macedonia, a young and brilliant king named Alexander had united the Greek states under his command. Charismatic, fearless, and driven by a sense of destiny, Alexander set his sights eastward, toward the land of Persia, the empire of legends. In 334 BCE, Alexander crossed the Hellespont, the same strait Xerxes had bridged a century and a half earlier. Where once Persia had invaded Greece, now Greece marched into Persia. History had reversed its course. At the Battle of Granicus, Alexander's forces crushed the local Persian satraps. A year later, at Issus, he faced Darius III himself. The Persians outnumbered the Greeks, but Alexander's tactics, speed, precision, and the sheer brilliance of his leadership shattered their lines. Darius fled the battlefield, leaving behind his family and royal treasures. The defeat sent shockwaves through the empire. Alexander advanced relentlessly, conquering Phoenicia, seizing Egypt, and being crowned as pharaoh in Memphis. He then turned eastward again, determined to face Darius one last time. That final confrontation came in 331 BCE, at Gaugamela, near modern-day Iraq. Darius assembled a massive army, including chariots, cavalry, and war elephants. It was the last stand of the Persian Empire. But Alexander's strategy was flawless. His forces broke through the Persian center, scattering the royal guard. Darius fled once more, this time never to return. Betrayed by his own men, the last great king of Persia was killed while fleeing. When Alexander found his body, he ordered a royal burial, honoring Darius as a noble ruler, not as a defeated enemy. With that act, the Achaemenid Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great 2 centuries earlier, came to its end. When Alexander entered Persepolis, the heart of Persian majesty, he was awed by its beauty. The grand palaces, the sculpted reliefs, the inscriptions of divine kingship. But in a single night, that splendor was lost. Whether as revenge for the burning of Athens, or in a drunken frenzy, Alexander set Persepolis ablaze. The flames consumed the city, and with it, the last embers of an empire that had once ruled the world. Yet even in destruction, Persia's legacy endured. Its systems of governance, its tolerance of faiths, its roads and architecture, its vision of unity. All these became models for future empires, from Rome to Byzantium. From Cyrus's mercy to Darius's order, from Persepolis's artistry to Zoroastrianism's moral philosophy, Persia's influence continued to shape civilizations long after its fall. The empire was gone, but its spirit lived on, woven into the fabric of human history. Empires rise, and empires fall. But few have left a mark upon humanity as profound and enduring as Persia. From the windswept plains of the Iranian plateau to the gleaming marble terraces of Persepolis, the story of Persia was never just about conquest. It was about vision, the transformation of wandering tribes into one of the most sophisticated civilizations the ancient world had ever known. More than 2,500 years ago, The Persians understood something timeless, that true power does not come from fear, but from unity. That greatness is not measured by how many lands you conquer, but by how you rule them. Under Cyrus, mercy became strength. Under Darius, order became power. Under Xerxes, ambition met its limit. And through their victories and their failures, Persia taught the world that empires could be built, not only with armies, but with ideas. Their roads became the arteries of civilization, carrying trade, culture, and knowledge across continents. Their coins linked economies separated by oceans. Their administration inspired nations for millennia. Their tolerance shaped the philosophies of kings, prophets, and leaders who followed. Even today, the echoes of that empire remain, in the languages we speak, the systems we live by, the art we admire, and the very notion of justice and governance that guides the modern world. Every civilization that came after, every nation that sought to rule or unite, walked in the footsteps of Cyrus the Great. The empire itself may have turned to dust, its palaces reduced to ruins, its kings remembered only in stone and story. But the idea of Persia endures. The idea that humanity can be diverse yet united, powerful yet just, strong, but compassionate. Perhaps that is the true legacy of Persia, not its walls or its wars, but its wisdom. Because long after the armies vanished and the monuments crumbled, what survived was not conquest, but memory. Not empire, but meaning. The story of a people who rose from the mountains of Iran and built a world that would never be the same again. The story of the Persian Empire. If this story moved you, don't let it fade here. Share it. Comment your thoughts. And subscribe for more forgotten histories that shape the world we live in today. Because the past isn't gone. It's simply waiting to be remembered.